She smirked at me, leaned closer, and whispered, "I accept late payments, if they come with interest." I thought she meant money, until I realized she meant me. Rent day had always made me nervous, but that evening was different. My heart raced for reasons that had nothing to do with money. I stood in the dim hallway, a late envelope in my hand, rehearsing apologies under my breath like a college kid about to face the principal. When the door finally opened, she stood there, my landlady. 42, elegant in a way that made the years look like a secret advantage. Her hair was tied loosely, a few strands falling across her cheek, and she wore a soft cardigan over a fitted blouse, casual but impossibly graceful. I stumbled through my explanation. Work hours had been cut, payments were delayed, I promised it wouldn't happen again. My voice trailed off as her eyes stayed fixed on me, calm, steady, as though she was reading not just my words but my thoughts. Then came the moment I wasn't prepared for. She tilted her head slightly, and the corner of her lips curved into a smirk, half amusement, half something unreadable. "I accept late payments," she said slowly, letting the silence stretch before finishing, "if they come with interest." For a heartbeat, I didn't understand. My brain scrambled for the practical meaning, but her tone carried a different weight. There was no anger in her voice, only playfulness, and maybe something else, curiosity. I caught the glint in her eyes, and suddenly the hallway felt too small, the air too warm. I laughed awkwardly, trying to cover my confusion, but she didn't move aside or close the door. Instead, she leaned lightly against the frame, her arms crossing as though she had all the time in the world. The faint scent of jasmine drifted toward me, subtle yet unforgettable. She wasn't rushing me away. She was holding me there, deliberately, waiting to see what I'd do. Her smirk didn't fade. It deepened, almost like she enjoyed watching me wrestle with her words. For the first time, I noticed the small dimple at the edge of her cheek when she smiled, the way her eyes seemed brighter when she teased. My chest tightened, not with fear of eviction, but with something far more dangerous. Attraction. I swallowed, shifting the envelope in my hand. Interest. I finally echoed, my voice quieter than I intended. She let the question hang, her gaze never leaving mine. Then, with a calmness that made my pulse hammer even louder, she replied, "Yes, interest." And just like that, the rules between landlady and tenant blurred. That smirk, that playful remark, it wasn't just about rent anymore. It was the opening move in a game I didn't yet understand, but one I already knew I was willing to play. Her words still lingered in my ears, "if they come with interest." I stood there frozen, caught between confusion and curiosity, until she finally broke the silence with a small laugh. It wasn't mocking, just light, as though she was amused at how easily I lost my footing around her. Then, almost casually, she opened the door wider. "Come inside," she said. "We'll talk about your interest." I stepped in hesitantly, the door clicking shut behind me. Her living room felt different than I remembered when I'd first signed the lease. Warm lamplight softened the space, music hummed faintly from a small speaker, and the scent of fresh coffee mixed with her perfume. It didn't feel like a landlord's house anymore. It felt lived in, intimate. A place where secrets lingered in the corners. She gestured for me to sit on the sofa while she settled into the armchair across from me. The way she crossed her legs so naturally made the simple movement feel deliberate, graceful. Her skirt brushed lightly against her knee as she leaned back, her eyes fixed on me. "So," she said, drawing out the word with that same teasing tone, "you owe me rent. But what I'm really asking for, is a little of your time." Her statement caught me off guard. My time? I blinked, unsure if she was serious or just playing with me. But the way she said it, calm, measured, like a business proposal wrapped in something far more personal, sent a shiver through me. "My time?" I repeated, half laughing, half nervous. "Yes," she said, her smirk softening into something closer to a smile. "You're young, busy, always rushing. I just want company, maybe. Someone to talk to, once in a while. Call it interest. The room felt heavier with her words, though her tone stayed light. I watched the way her fingers toyed with the edge of her bracelet, how her gaze flickered briefly away before meeting mine again. It was a subtle vulnerability, a glimpse beneath the confident exterior. I nodded slowly, unsure why my chest tightened at her request. That doesn't sound like much interest, I said quietly. She tilted her head, her lips curving again into that knowing smirk. Depends on how much you're willing to give. The silence that followed wasn't awkward this time. It was charged. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, the hum of the music filling the spaces our words left behind. Sitting across from her, I realized this wasn't about rent at all. This was about something unspoken, a negotiation neither of us wanted to rush. And in that moment, I knew, I wasn't worried about owing her anymore. I was more afraid of what I might be willing to give. I didn't realize how much time had passed until I noticed the lamplight outside dimming into evening shadows. She had poured us both a glass of wine, red, rich, carrying a faint spice, and for the first time since I'd moved into the building, we weren't landlady and tenant. We were simply two people, sharing a quiet night together. She told me stories from her past, not in the way people brag, but in the way people confess. About the city when it was younger, about nights spent chasing dreams that didn't always come true, about the people she had loved and lost along the way. Her voice had a softness to it now, a melody that carried more weight than the words themselves. I found myself leaning forward, elbows on my knees, listening closer than I meant to. It wasn't just what she said, it was the way her eyes seemed to shine brighter when she remembered laughter, and the way her voice dropped when she spoke of pain. I could see the years in her, but not as lines or burdens. More like layers, graceful, resilient, beautiful in a way I hadn't understood before. At one point, she laughed, covering her mouth briefly like she'd forgotten how to sound carefree. The sound startled me, it was warm, low, and completely disarming. I laughed with her, not at her words, but at the simple fact that I wanted to hear that laugh again. She leaned across the small table to refill my glass, her hand brushing mine as she steadied the bottle. It was nothing, an accidental touch, a fleeting moment, but it sent a warmth racing up my arm, settling somewhere deep in my chest. She didn't pull away quickly. Instead, her fingers lingered a second too long, and when she glanced up, her eyes caught mine. The air between us shifted. The music seemed quieter, the ticking clock slower. It wasn't a moment of grand declarations or stolen kisses. It was smaller than that, but far more dangerous. A brush of skin, a shared silence, a glance that lasted longer than it should. I cleared my throat, trying to break the tension, but my voice came out softer than I intended. You don't sound like someone who lives alone. Her smile faded into something gentler, almost sad. I wasn't always alone, she said. Then, after a pause, her gaze held mine again. But sometimes company comes when you least expect it. The words sank deep, heavier than they should have. And as I sat there, glass warm in my hand, I realized her interest wasn't about rent. It was about moments like this, moments where two lives brushed against each other and neither wanted to step back. The night had grown quieter, softer, as though the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. After a while, she stood, gathering the empty glasses. Come on, she said with a half-smile. If you're staying, you might as well help with the dishes. That can be part of your interest. I followed her into the kitchen, a space that felt warmer than the living room, with soft yellow light pooling across the counters. She rolled up her sleeves casually, but the motion revealed her wrists, delicate, elegant, with a faint glint of a silver bracelet that caught the light each time she moved. I reached to take one of the glasses from her, and our fingers brushed. Just a touch, nothing more, but it stopped me cold. The glass sat suspended between us, her hand resting against mine for a fraction longer than necessary. I should have pulled back quickly, but I didn't. Neither did she. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady, unflinching, though her breathing had changed. The sound of running water filled the silence, but it only made the pause between us sharper, heavier. For a moment, it felt like the entire room had collapsed into that single point of contact, her hand on mine, the warmth of her skin bleeding into me. Finally, she pulled away, setting the glass gently in the sink. "You're too quiet," she said softly, almost like she needed to speak to break her own tension. I swallowed, realizing my voice had abandoned me. "I'm just trying not to say something I shouldn't." Her hand stilled on the counter. She turned her head, eyes finding mine again, her expression unreadable. "And what would that be?" she asked, her tone calm but laced with something fragile, as if daring me to answer. My heart pounded. I wanted to tell her everything, the pull I felt toward her, the way her smile had carved itself into my thoughts, the way even her silences felt like invitations. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I managed, that I'm not sure if this feels wrong, or if it feels more right than anything has in a long time. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment she didn't move. Then she exhaled, a breath that seemed to carry more weight than air. Her eyes flickered downward, to my mouth, then quickly away. The silence stretched. The hum of the refrigerator, the trickle of water, the faint sound of music in the next room, all of it blurred behind the electric tension holding us in place. Finally, she stepped back, her expression soft but guarded. "Careful," she whispered. "Interest can add up faster than you expect." And though she turned away, rinsing the glass as if nothing had passed between us, I knew everything had changed. The dishes were done, the kitchen quiet again, but neither of us seemed ready to end the night. She carried her glass toward the balcony and slid the door open. A cool rush of night air spilled into the room, carrying with it the faint hum of the city beyond. Without asking, I followed. The balcony was small, lined with a few potted plants that gave off a faint earthy scent. Overhead, the sky was deep and still, the kind of night where the stars felt too far away but the moon lit everything with a silver glow. She leaned against the railing, shawl draped loosely around her shoulders, her posture relaxed but her eyes distant. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, the air cool against our skin, the city noise softened by distance. Then she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "It's strange, isn't it? How a house can be full of things, but still feel empty." I turned to her, hearing the weight in her words. There was no teasing smirk this time, no playful tone. Just honesty. "You mean it feels empty, for you?" She smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed on the sky. "It has for years." She pulled the shawl tighter, as if the cool air had crept into her bones. "I've kept people at a distance. Safer that way. But safer doesn't mean happier." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. I had only seen her confident, composed, always in control. To hear her admit to loneliness, it felt like she had opened a door she rarely touched. I hesitated, then said, "I don't think you're meant to stay alone. You have too much presence. Too much warmth." My voice faltered, but it was the truth. Her head turned then, eyes meeting mine. The look she gave me wasn't playful, nor was it guarded. It was searching, as if she wanted to believe my words but didn't trust herself to. "And you?" she asked softly. "You're young. You should be out there, chasing someone who fits your life, not someone whose story is already half written." I stepped closer without thinking, the space between us narrowing. "Maybe I'm not looking for someone to fit. Maybe I'm looking for someone who makes me stop running." The silence that followed was heavier than any words could be. The night air carried a chill, and without thinking, I reached to adjust the shawl slipping from her shoulder. My fingers brushed the curve of her collarbone, light, hesitant. She inhaled sharply, her gaze fixed on me. Neither of us moved away. And in that suspended moment, under the silver wash of moonlight, I realized she wasn't just my landlady anymore. She was a woman I was falling dangerously close to needing. The night had stretched longer than either of us intended. The wine was gone, the city outside had quieted, and yet neither of us had made a move to end it. We stood there on the balcony, silence wrapping around us as tightly as the cool night air. When she finally turned back toward me, there was no smirk, no teasing smile. Just a softness in her eyes, something I had only seen in glimpses before. She reached up, brushing back a strand of her hair, and for the first time, she looked uncertain. Vulnerable in a way that pulled at me more deeply than any smile ever could. "I'm not sure this is wise," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but her fingers tugged lightly at the shawl around her shoulders, betraying the nervousness beneath. "You're younger, full of possibilities. And me? I've lived through my share of mistakes." I stepped closer, until only a breath separated us. "Maybe wisdom isn't always about avoiding mistakes," I answered. "Maybe it's about knowing when something feels too right to ignore." Her eyes searched mine, as if weighing my words. The air between us thickened, heavy with everything unspoken. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand. It hovered for a moment before resting lightly against my chest. Just that, her palm against me, feeling the quiet rhythm of my heartbeat. The gesture was simple, but it felt like a choice, a surrender. I covered her hand with mine, holding it there. "You don't have to keep people at a distance anymore," I whispered. "Not me." Something in her expression softened further, and then she let out a quiet laugh, gentle, almost shy. "Maybe this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is the kind of interest I've been waiting for." The words lingered between us, settling deeper than any contract or agreement ever could. We didn't rush into a kiss, didn't shatter the fragile quiet with something too sudden. Instead, she leaned into me, her cheek resting lightly against my shoulder. I wrapped my arm around her, pulling her close. Her body was warm against mine, her breath steadying as she allowed herself to simply be held. The city lights blinked in the distance, but in that moment, the world narrowed to the two of us. I could feel her heartbeat through the thin fabric of her blouse, steady but unguarded, and I realized I wasn't just drawn to her beauty or her confidence. I was drawn to her humanity, the strength, the cracks, the longing she had hidden so carefully until tonight. We stayed like that for a long while, saying nothing, just breathing in the silence together. When she finally pulled back, she looked at me with a smile that wasn't teasing, wasn't guarded, it was real. The kind of smile people give when they've finally let down their walls. "Good night," she said softly, though her hand lingered in mine a little longer than it needed to. As I left her apartment, the echo of her words, "the kind of interest I've been waiting for," stayed with me. It wasn't just rent, or company, or even the game of attraction. It was something real. Something fragile. Something worth risking the rules for. And I knew, as I walked back into the quiet hallway, that whatever came next, nothing between us would ever be the same again.